I couldn't sleep. Not one real minute. Midnight turned into pale morning, and every time I closed my eyes, Lena's face filled the dark, wide, terrified, the skin around her mouth raw where tape had been ripped away. The video kept replaying in flashes behind my eyelids, like a strobe I couldn't switch off. I lay there, chest tight, thinking small, stupid thoughts. Maybe it's a joke, maybe it's staged, maybe I'm overreacting, and each one felt both possible and impossible at once. By 7 I was on autopilot. Coffee in a paper cup. Keys in the ignition. My hands shook while I drove the familiar routes, feeling everything like someone else feels their first winter. The city looked like it had been washed clean, but there was a grit in the gutters I couldn't ignore. I needed answers, and I had one obvious place to start: Ethan. His building loomed like a model set, perfect paint, exact shrubbery, an entrance that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. I rang his bell thinking I'd knock and storm in, demand explanations. Instead, he opened the door before I could lift my fist. He was impossibly composed, hair neat, color sharp. The smile that greeted me could have been made for a camera. It did not reach his eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice that practiced cadence of concern. A live broadcast of sympathy. "No," I said, too small to be honest. "Tell me about Lena. Tell me about the video." He let the silence settle like dust, then sighed as if he'd been waiting for me to tire out and finally stop asking. "You shouldn't be mixing yourself up in this," he said. "It's dangerous." "Dangerous for who?" I snapped, anger flaring into something like clarity. "Lena? Me? Who's doing this to her?" He closed the door a fraction, enough to create distance, but not to shut me out. "It's not what it looks like," he said. He paused, and the pause did the job of a confession. "Some of it is staged. They stage things to provoke reactions. To learn patterns." "Who is they?" I demanded. The word tasted like panic. He looked at me with an expression that wasn't pity so much as exhaustion. "It's a project," he said finally. "A study. They call it." He broke off as if the name on his tongue might burn me. When he did speak again, it was quieter, almost pleading. "You weren't supposed to see the files. You weren't supposed to be involved." "Ethan," I said, and my voice went thin. "Are you telling me Lena's fear is fake? That we're all part of some experiment?" He rubbed his temple like the thought physically hurt. "Some of it is manipulated, yes. But fake is a brutal word. They manufacture scenarios. They provoke. They watch. They analyze. They calibrate." His fingers trembled just a little when he reached for the edge of the doorframe. That, more than his words, told me the truth I needed. He knew more than he was letting on, and he was somewhere between complicit and trapped. I left his building with my brain on fire. If Ethan was part of it, whether by choice or coercion, that explained his rehearsed calm. It also explained why he'd been at Lena's building at odd hours, moving boxes in and out. But I couldn't make the leap from rehearsed affection to outright cruelty. People could be trained, coerced, convinced. People could also choose to hurt. Mrs. Chang from down the hall told me only what she had seen: Lena leaving in a rush, a suitcase grabbed at the last second, her face pale, the kind of motion you do when someone scares you into running. "She looked like a woman who had just been betrayed," Mrs. Chang said. "And Ethan? He comes and goes in the night. Always polite. Always carrying something." She made a small hand motion as if closing a box. "And men who carry boxes at 3 in the morning, well." She left the rest unsaid. Back in my apartment, the clock moved like a metronome. I tried not to think of the duct-taped mouth or the scarred man, but I couldn't help picking up the flash drive Lena had sent and looking again. There were more files I hadn't noticed the first time. PDFs, documents with headers I didn't understand, names and dates and institutional insignias, a university crest, a corporate logo, an ethics board stamp. Someone had taken the language of legitimacy and papered over what they were doing. One file name made me pause: project_mirror_archive_v2. I clicked. The screen filled with footage. Not random clips, carefully labeled sessions, phase notes, timestamps. There were videos of Lena with cues in the margins. Prompt at 0:34, evoke nostalgia, observe, micro-expression at 0:47. Then footnote, subject reaction within expected range. Who writes footnotes to friends? Who turns feelings into datasets? My stomach clenched when another clip played. The duct-taped person's lips moved silently in the clip, and then the camera cut to a handwritten page. Actor_004, compensation issued. The word actor sat there like a splinter under a nail. Someone had hired actors to stage trauma. But why? To teach? To test? To break? Each rational explanation felt worse than the last. And yet, even as I watched the stage tags, Lena's eyes, real, raw, not the camera-tuned Lena from Instagram, stared back with a kind of truth that made my throat close. If some of it had been orchestrated, that didn't mean Lena hadn't been harmed. It meant the edges of the harm were being defined by people who treated our lives like lab subjects. My phone buzzed with a message. 3 words, look up now. My head snapped up so quickly the room spun. There was a silhouette outside my window, impossible to place in the streetlights. I slid the curtains aside and saw a man, same build as the one in the hallway earlier, standing by my building, watching. He didn't move when he saw me. He simply lifted a pale hand and pointed, slow and deliberate, at the flash drive in my palm. Then he turned and walked away. The theft of privacy had a protocol. You were watched, you were signaled, and then you were left with the knowledge that someone could always be there again. I started to talk to myself in the only way that calmed me, cataloging. If this was a study, the files might tell me the parameters. If I could find the source, I could find motives. I dug deeper. There were ledgers embedded in PDFs. Budget, participant recruitment, talent, equipment. Names of firms I recognized from sponsorships and grant pages. The project had money. Money meant resources. Resources meant reach. There were also emails. Encrypted at first, but with subject lines I could read. Phase 3 escalation. Liaison. Field agent update. Consent verification outstanding. One signature kept appearing, a name that felt like salt in an open wound. Dr. Esme LaRoche. The name surfaced as a leader, an architect, someone attached to ivory towers and glossy interviews about behavioral prediction. The more I clicked, the more the net closed. Dr. LaRoche had a smiling headshot in one file and a roster of locations in another. She had been given authority, and that authority had allowed a program to go dark. By afternoon, I had enough to be dangerous, or at least enough to terrify me into action. I printed screenshots, a ridiculous, almost quaint act in a city full of screens, and slid them into an envelope. I considered going to the police. Only, the police might read my printouts and see paperwork that was stamped with institutions. They might turn the files over to those same institutions and the whole thing would vanish into compliance reviews and legalese. I thought about journalists and how fast truths can be chopped into clickbait, how slow it is to repair harm once someone's life has been used for data. I needed someone neutral. Someone hungry. I called an independent reporter I'd seen speak on a local podcast about whistleblowing. He didn't return my call immediately, but he texted within the hour, "Meet me at 9. Bring what you have." I felt a thread of relief. Maybe this could move beyond the dizzying reach of a project that turned people into test subjects. At 8, the reporter met me in a dim coffee shop, all knees and nervous excitement. He held the printouts like holy relics. "This is something," he breathed. "But be careful. People who make projects like this don't like exposure." He tapped a photo where Ethan was labeled field operative, relational embedding. He looked up at me past thick glasses. You have to ask, did Ethan know in advance? Is he victim or participant? The file suggests both. His honesty was merciless. Also, you need to know whether Lena was compromised willingly or coerced. The docs show stages where participants moved from recruited to embedded. He used words like solder and scaffold. The coffee cooled between us. We agreed on a plan. He would run a small, cautious piece if we could verify names and secure additional records. I would keep digging for anything that indicated consent or funding. We had a start. It was fragile and small and legal. It was also terrifying. That night, exhausted, I returned home and realized with a slow, sick clarity that the project had anticipated my moves. My apartment door had a small slit at the top of the frame, one that hadn't been there before, and my plants had been moved. Someone knew when I would be gone and what I would do. As if the entire narrative had been waiting for a protagonist willing to dig. My phone vibrated with a short voice note. Lena's voice. Breathing ragged. "They're watching everything. They stage a scene," she said, each word a dropped stone. "But sometimes they don't stage everything. Sometimes someone gets hurt for real." I tried to help. I tried to sabotage a file. A sob cut her off. Then, "Don't trust Ethan." "Not fully. He's trying." The note ended with a sigh that sounded like defeat. I listened to it 3 times and on the third listen I realized what I had to do. I would not be a passive subject in someone else's catalog. I would not allow them to turn our lives into studies without consequence. The reporter needed more. The public needed a thread it could follow. Lena needed rescue if she was trapped. And I, if I valued anything at all, needed truth. But as I gathered the files, my laptop screen flickered and a new file popped into the folder I had just closed. A single, short clip with no title. It opened on a frame of my childhood backyard, a small, ridiculous thing I'd shown only my closest friends. A photo I thought had lived only on my family drive. The clip was a single image of that little girl on a swing. Someone had a catalog of everything. Someone had a map of me. Beneath the clip, a line of text. "Good work. Proceed to phase, exposure." And the message that followed, cold and precise. "We can always find you." I sat very still, the room feeling suddenly enormous and suffocating. I had answers now that changed everything. Project Mirror existed. Ethan's role was twisted between agent and captive. The duct tape scene had at least partially been staged, but the harm was not entirely synthetic. And Lena had reached out from whatever place of fear she inhabited to warn me. But 4 great questions still split the world open. Who truly controlled Project Mirror? Where was Lena now, safe, hidden, or worse? Was I being observed still at this very second? And how many lives had been reduced to data points? I didn't have the answers, but I had momentum. That night, I locked my doors, turned my phone off for 10 minutes, and breathed hard enough to feel the oxygen change my brain. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun.